If you enjoy what you hear here today, please consider supporting me on my Patreon page. Every dollar helps, and you get to see content that you won't see here. Chapter 8. Ever. No matter what. Rainbow flooded her eyes in response to the harsh light that was bearing down on her. She tried to sit up, but the throbbing pain she felt as she lifted her head told her that would be a bad idea. She shut her eyes as she heard a soft voice pierce through the blackness.
"Don't try to sit up,"
the voice said in a familiar tone. Rainbow slowly opened her eyes and saw a vaguely familiar purple blob coalesce into the shape of a pony.
"Twilight?"
Rainbow asked. Speaking hurt her throat, and she realized that she was parched.
"Yeah, it's me." Where am I?"
she asked raspily, ignoring the pain.
"You're in the hospital. How do you feel?"
The events of last night came rushing back to her. She sat up suddenly, which caused her head to explode with pain again.
"Scootaloo! How's Scootaloo? Is she—"
Twilight gently pushed her friend back down before hoofing her a glass full of water.
"Scootaloo's okay. She's in the next room. She has a concussion and a pretty nasty bump on her head, but the doctors say she's going to be fine." "And lightning strike?"
Twilight spoke very softly.
"He's dead, Rainbow. They found his body under your cloud. Looked like he fell. No one's sure what happened, but I assume he was trying to hurt you. I already talked to the guards. No charges are going to be filed." "How'd you pull that off?" "I named the area just below your cloud a sovereign country,"
Twilight said with a deadpan stare.
"Really, Twi? Aren't you gonna get in trouble?"
Twilight smiled.
"Relax. I'm only kidding."
Her smile then disappeared, replaced by a much more sober expression.
"This looks bad for them. A decorated captain breaking into a house and stabbing a pony while violating a restraining order during a full abuse investigation. They want this to go away as much as you do. They can't piece together exactly what happened, but self-defense seems the most likely ruling. You'll have to talk to some guards before they can officially close it, but I told them that it could wait until you felt better."
Rainbow took a small sip of her water. The cool liquid burned her throat on the way down. She closed her eyes and let out a deep breath.
"I killed him, Twilight. He broke in and I could have saved him."
She shut her eyes and futilely tried to block out the vision of the stallion falling helplessly toward the ground.
"I know I should feel bad, but I don't. Am I a bad pony?"
Twilight shook her head.
"I won't pretend to know what you're going through, but I know you, Rainbow. And you are not a bad pony. You were placed in an impossible situation. And I'm not sure that Equestria isn't better off without him,"
she said quietly. The two friends sat in silence. Twilight wished desperately that there was something else she could say that would be of comfort to Rainbow Dash, but words seemed woefully inadequate at the moment. Rainbow Dash kept playing the scene over and over again in her head. Every time she saw Lightning Strike hanging on for dear life, she wondered if she had done the right thing. She couldn't definitively say yes. But try as she might, she couldn't make herself feel anything but glad that he was dead. He would never hurt Scootaloo again, and for that reason alone, Rainbow decided that she could learn to live with her decision, as awful as it may or may not have been. The uncomfortable silence was broken by a brown stallion in a white lab coat carrying a clipboard entering the room. "Hello again, Rainbow Dash. I'm Dr. Stable. You may remember me from your last visit. You're very lucky. If that cut were a little deeper, you would have had a punctured stomach. But, as it is, you suffered no internal damage. You did, however, lose a lot of blood. I needed 7 stitches to close you up. Now, ideally, I'd like to keep you here overnight for observation, but I can't force you to stay. Do you have any questions?"
What about Scootaloo?
"She can leave too, but I want to see her in a few days for a follow-up visit." The thought suddenly occurred to Rainbow that, with Lightning gone, Scootaloo was safe at home again.
Is she going with her mom, or?
Twilight cleared her throat.
You're still her legal guardian until the FPS investigation closes. Her mom's in the waiting room. She's not with Scootaloo. Scootaloo said she didn't want to see her. She's waiting for you to wake up, but the doctors thought it would be best if she stayed in bed.
Twilight said. "I'll go get her. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to know you're awake," Dr. Stable said before turning around and exiting the room. A few moments later, the orange filly appeared in the doorway, Scootaloo's eyes widening as she entered the room. As soon as she saw Rainbow Dash, she burst into a sprint, her momentum carrying her to the edge of the bed where she rose up on her hind legs and tried to leap into the forelegs of her big sister. Unfortunately, the guardrails that prevented Rainbow from falling out of her bed also prevented Scootaloo from jumping into it. Her wings buzzed furiously, and she let out a pained and urgent whine as she tried to surmount the obstacle. But she wasn't to do anything but more than momentarily raise her head over the guardrail. Twilight took pity on the small filly and gently levitated her up over the guardrail and deposited her safely on Rainbow Dash's chest using her magic. Once there, Scootaloo wrapped her forelegs around Rainbow and buried her face into her neck. Watching this, Twilight got the distinct impression that she was intruding on an emotional and personal moment, and quietly began to back out of the room. Rainbow nodded in appreciation at her friend, before turning her attention fully to stroking the soft purple mane of the filly who was presently curled up in a ball on her chest, breathing in short, staccato bursts.
I woke up and you weren't there, and then I saw you and you weren't moving.
Scootaloo choked out, trying to hold back the oncoming rush of tears that she knew was inevitable. Rainbow continued to gently stroke Scootaloo's mane as she whispered in her ear.
"It's okay. I'm right here. I'm right here. I'm right here."
She repeated those words until she could feel the filly get her breathing under control. After a few minutes, Scootaloo had calmed down enough to consent to being gently lifted off of Rainbow's chest, and therefore eased the pressure on her still tender barrel. Rainbow gently set Scootaloo on the ground next to the bed, though she lowered the guardrail so that Scootaloo could rest her forelegs next to Rainbow's head. Now that the filly was no longer curled up on her chest, Rainbow got a better look at the filly. She had a large red welt on the back of her head that made Rainbow wince. Still, she tried to smile reassuringly.
"How you feeling, kiddo?"
she asked.
"I'm okay. My head hurts, but it's not too bad. The doctor said I should take it easy for the next few days, so I guess that means no scooting. You and me both, kid. You ready to get out of here?" "We can leave?"
Scootaloo asked, somewhat surprised.
think the doc said they want to give us each a once-over, but yeah, I think they'll let us out of here tonight. I have this thing about staying in hospitals, you know? What about Lightning?
At the mention of the stallion's name, Scootaloo found herself shaking ever so slightly.
He's gone. He'll never hurt any pony ever again,
Rainbow said, hoping Scootaloo wouldn't ask any follow-up questions. Scootaloo shut her eyes as she tried to push back against her memories of the stallion who had made her life a living nightmare.
Promise? I promise.
Took longer to check out of the hospital than Rainbow expected. Dr. Stable gave Rainbow a thorough physical, just to be sure that, other than the 7 stitches in her side and her superficial bruises, she was okay. Then he spent an hour making sure she understood how to change her bandages, and that it was imperative that she keep her wound clean and free of anything that might cause an infection. Then, because she was Scootaloo's guardian, he meticulously went over the warning signs for post-concussion syndrome, lest Scootaloo start showing any symptoms. Then, he went and presumably repeated the process with Scootaloo, which left Rainbow with some free time to kill in the hospital waiting room. After assuring Twilight that she was fine, and that she would meet up with her and their friends tomorrow, Rainbow found herself alone with her thoughts. She was so busy contemplating the events of the last few days that she was surprised when a familiar-looking orange mare tapped her on the shoulder.
Rainbow Dash? I'm Misty Skies. I wanted to say thank you for taking care of my daughter. Taking care of her? I got stabbed protecting her from the monster you let into her life. Where the buck were you when she was being abused? She could have been killed.
But instead of saying any of that, Rainbow managed to push her feelings of outrage down deep. If there was one thing Rainbow had gotten plenty of practice in over the last few harrowing days, it was suppressing her emotions. Instead, she chose to respond with a somewhat neutral,
Skies? That's an unusual name for an earth pony.
Misty Skies regarded Rainbow with a faint sense of curiosity.
It was originally just Misty, but when I married Scootaloo's father, I took his last name. Anyway, the reason I'm here is I want to discuss with you when you would like to drop Scootaloo off at home.
The question caught Rainbow completely off guard, despite its predictability.
I'm sorry, what? I know a lot has happened. Truth be told, I'm still trying to process everything myself. But Scootaloo belongs at home with me. What time tomorrow can I expect you to drop her off?
Rainbow just blinked. Despite knowing that Scootaloo wasn't actually going to live with her for more than a few weeks, she had gotten so used to having to filly around in an extraordinarily short amount of time. It hadn't really occurred to her that Scootaloo would end up back with her mother. Still trying to process this new reality, Rainbow managed to ask,
Have you talked to Scootaloo yet? No. She's been pretty adamant about not wanting to see me, and I don't think upsetting her while she's in such a fragile state is a good idea. So, if you don't mind, I think it would be best if she spent the night with you, and you can drop her off in the morning.
Rainbow wasn't sure how to respond, but deep down she was forced to admit that Misty was right. As close as they had become, Scootaloo wasn't really Rainbow's sister, and she belonged with her mother. And that was to say nothing of the fact that once FPS closed their investigation, Rainbow would be required to hand Scootaloo back over to her mother's care for real, or face a legitimate full napping charge, one that Twilight probably wouldn't be able to thwart.
I'll bring her by after breakfast.
she said, more reluctantly than she cared to admit.
Good. Very good now. I'll see you tomorrow.
Misty promptly left the waiting room, leaving Rainbow alone with her thoughts. She had done good, right? Lightning wouldn't hurt Scootaloo ever again. She had kept her promise. So why didn't she feel better? A nurse came over and handed over a set of discharge papers for both her and Scootaloo. The mundane paperwork gave her something to focus on while she waited for Scootaloo to finish with her exit examination. She spent a while poring over them. Shortly after she was finished with the paperwork, Scootaloo appeared in the waiting room, followed by Dr. Stable. Scootaloo walked over a little faster than her normal walking speed and let out a relieved whinny when she found herself next to the Cyan Pegasus. Rainbow leaned down and let Scootaloo climb up on her back, which elicited a small sigh of contentment from the filly, and she snuggled against her mane. Now discharged, Rainbow flew back home a little slower than usual. For one thing, the doctors had warned her that overexerting herself would probably tear her stitches, and then she would end up needing them redone. For another thing, she was pretty worn out. Apparently, stitches and blood loss were far more tiring than flying sprints around the track. But more than any of that, she knew that she was going to miss the sensation of Scootaloo snuggled tight against her mane as she flew through the air. And she wanted to ensure that she got to enjoy that sensation as long as she could this last time. She walked into the front door of her cloud house, expecting everything to be a bloody mess. She couldn't remember exactly how the place had looked when she left last night, but she was willing to bet it was not a pretty picture. But she was surprised when she walked in to see an immaculate house with a small note on her kitchen counter.
We already hired a cleaning service to clean up after the Royal Police finished gathering evidence. And there's some soup to Fluttershy made in the fridge. Applejack left you a jug of cider. Try not to drink it all at once. Also, Pinky baked you a cake. It's in the freezer. Your friend, Twilight Sparkle.
Rainbow smiled. She knew that she had great friends, but it was nice to be reminded of that fact every now and then. Rainbow let Scootaloo climb off her back, which the filly did somewhat reluctantly. And as she let Scootaloo climb down, she caught their reflections on the glossy surface of the fridge. They both looked awful. A day's worth of grime was stuck to their coats. Their manes were matted down and unruly. If Rarity could see them, she'd have recoiled in terror.
Ugh. I don't know about you, kid, but I could use a shower,
Rainbow said, still trying to assess how bad she looked using the distorted reflection on her fridge.
Me too,
came the reply from Scootaloo.
You want the upstairs or the downstairs one?
Rainbow asked, grateful that her house had more rooms than she really needed.
Upstairs. All right, it's all yours, Squirt. I'll heat up dinner once we're both cleaned up. Cool,
Scootaloo said before hurrying upstairs. Once Rainbow stepped into the bathroom, she gingerly peeled off her bandages, and for the first time, she got a good look at herself in the mirror. A fresh, ugly scar ran across the length of her stomach, the red gash a vivid contrast to her cyan coat. Shifting her gaze, she noticed that her chest still bore a large bruise from where lightning strike had kicked her. If there was an upside, it was that it matched the bruises around her throat where he had tried to choke her. All in all, she looked like death warmed over. She stepped into the shower and turned the water to just below scalding. She shut her eyes as the hot water washed over her, washing away the dirt and loosening her muscles. She didn't realize how sore she was until she felt some of the tension unwind. After shampooing her mane and tail, She rinsed off and stepped out of the shower to apply a fresh set of bandages. Following the doctor's instructions, she carefully cleaned her wound with an antiseptic before replacing the bandages. Once she was finished wrapping them around her torso, she took another look at herself in the mirror. Even cleaned up, she looked pretty terrible.
Who am I kidding? I can't take care of a filly. I can barely take care of myself most of the time. Misty's right. Scootaloo belongs at home.
Rainbow left the bathroom and tried to put on a brave face as she saw Scootaloo eagerly awaiting her return in the living room. The shower did the filly a world of good compared to Rainbow, and she looked almost normal, except for the welt.
So, kid, what do you want to do for your last night in the clouds?
Scootaloo seized up at Rainbow's question.
What do you mean? Well, with Lightning gone, FBI should wrap up its investigation and you can go live with your mom again.
Scootaloo shook her head.
I don't want to go back there. I want to stay here with you. Scoots, please, Rainbow. I can be better. I know I can. I won't drop any more dishes and I'll work really hard at flying so you can take down the cloud ladder. Please, Rainbow Dash.
Scootaloo pleaded as she looked up at Rainbow with her impossibly wide purple eyes.
Whoa. Slow down there, Squirt. First off, it would be impossible for you to be any more awesome than you already are. Then why can't I stay with you? Because she's your mom, Scoots. I don't want to be the one to break up your family. Some family.
Scootaloo scoffed.
My dad died and my mom...
Scootaloo's voice trailed off.
When Lightning was hurting me, I kept staring at the door, hoping that one of those days she would open it and make everything okay. Because that's what moms are supposed to do. Only she never came. Now when I finally worked up the courage to tell her, she just told me to stop making up stories. I never want to go back to that house, and I never want to see her again. Kid, your mom made a mistake. No, she didn't. A mistake is when you forget what day of the week it is, or when you leave the window open and it gets cold at night. This wasn't a mistake. She chose him over me.
Rainbow racked her brain, trying to find some words that might comfort the little filly.
Sometimes, when you really want something to not be true, you convince yourself that it's not. Because if it is true, nothing else makes sense. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying...
Rainbow went silent as she realized that even she didn't really believe what she was saying.
She wasn't there for me. I needed her, and she wasn't there. Now you're saying that you don't want to be there for me either.
Scootaloo began to tremble before breaking down into fitful sobs.
What's wrong with me? Why doesn't any pony love me?
Rainbow's voice grew noticeably softer.
You think that that's what this is about? You really think, after everything that's happened, that I don't love you? I don't know.
The filly managed to choke out between tears. Rainbow reached out and wrapped a wing around the little filly, pulling her close. Scootaloo put up a token resistance, refusing to accept Rainbow's affection by crossing her forelegs and keeping her body rigid. Rainbow rested her head on top of Scootaloo and just held her gently until she could feel the filly start to give in. Eventually, Scootaloo uncrossed her forelegs and wrapped them around the larger Pegasus. Keeping Scootaloo nestled firmly between her wing and the warmth of her body, Rainbow gently nuzzled her on top of the head. They stayed like that for more than a few minutes, Rainbow gently nuzzling Scootaloo until her tears receded ever so slightly.
Feel a little better?
Rainbow asked softly. Scootaloo shook her head.
Look, I think you should give your mom another chance. But I'm not going to force you to. If you don't end up staying with me, it won't be because I don't love you, Scoots. I love you more than anything, period. Don't ever forget that.
Rainbow had never really said those words and meant them in that way. But she had to admit that saying them to Scootaloo then and there felt right. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere between letting the little filly watch her practice and curling up with her to calm her down at night, Rainbow realized that she did in fact love Scootaloo, but that didn't change the reality that the filly had a mother who wanted her to come home. Scootaloo hugged Rainbow tightly and buried her face in the bigger pony's chest.
I want to stay with you,
she said softly. Rainbow winced as Scootaloo put pressure on her already tender barrel, but she hugged the filly back anyway. Oh, she wanted to say yes more than she had ever wanted to say yes to anything. But she knew that the world didn't work that way. She looked down at the filly burying into her chest, who had already been dealt such a rough hand. She was a Pegasus who couldn't fly at an age where most were practicing loops and corkscrews, and it was possible that she would never be able to fly. Her dad had died when she was just a foal, and then his replacement had turned out to be a monster. But despite all of that hardship, Scootaloo managed to be a kind and gentle filly, whose enthusiasm for adventure mirrored Rainbow's own. She was cheerful and optimistic when most ponies who had been through what she had to go through would have been sullen and withdrawn. Why couldn't she get what she wanted? Just this one time. Rainbow let out a small groan at how unfair life could be.
I'm not going to make you do anything you don't want to do,
she whispered. They obviously weren't going to resolve this issue tonight. Both she and Scootaloo were exhausted. Other ponies needed to be consulted. And if she was somehow going to take care of Scootaloo on more than an interim basis, there would be many hurdles that needed to be overcome.
Can we maybe talk about this in the morning?
She finally suggested. Scootaloo nodded meekly, still keeping her grip firm on the Cyan Pegasus.
I want to stay with you,
she repeated, as though if she said the words enough times, she could will it to happen.
I know, kid,
Rainbow said softly.
We should eat. I'm going to go heat up some soup. You want any?
Scootaloo nodded and slowly released her grip on the Cyan Pegasus. True to her word, Rainbow heated up the soup, and the two Pegasi ate in silence, broken only by the quiet hums of the night outside. Rainbow badly wanted to assure Scootaloo that everything would be fine. But she wasn't sure if she could keep that kind of promise. And she couldn't stand the idea that she might let her little sister down. Faced with unintentionally lying or staying silent, Rainbow chose silence. After leaving the dishes in the sink, Rainbow noticed the now familiar signs of a tired Scootaloo.
Hey, how about a bedtime story?
She offered in the hopes of lifting Scootaloo's spirits, and her face did light up ever so slightly. She never felt quite so safe or so loved than she did when she was snuggled under the covers, listening to Rainbow spin a tale complete with voices and elaborate hoof gestures as she narrated the action sequences.
Can I stay in your room tonight?
Sure, Scoots.
And you promise you'll be there when I wake up?
Scootaloo asked with the faintest note of fear in her voice. Rainbow was surprised by the question, but she sat down on her haunches right in front of Scootaloo and looked her square in the eyes.
I'm not going anywhere. Ever. No matter what. You got that?
The answer seemed to pacify Scootaloo a little bit, and she smiled before climbing onto Rainbow's back, and the two Pegasi went upstairs. Rainbow deposited Scootaloo into her bed and told her the light-hearted tale of Shepherd and the salamanders. Scootaloo had heard it before, but that didn't stop her from grinning happily as Rainbow narrated the familiar story, complete with funny, high-pitched voices for the salamanders. When she was done, she hopped into bed and curled up with Scootaloo, wrapping a wing around the filly and lightly ruffling her mane before closing her eyes.
I love you, Rainbow Dash,
the filly whispered.
I love you too, Scoots,
Rainbow replied as she held the filly tightly, before the day's events finally caught up to them, and both Pegasi drifted off to sleep.